This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Today's Check the Report episode is brought to you by The Athletic, premium coverage for passionate Detroit sports fans. Check the Report listeners can get 20% off the first year of an annual subscription by visiting theathletic.com/DSP.
All right, Vito, let's check the report. Welcome to another edition of this very fine podcast where we get a chance to talk to those in the know. This week, we have Chris Solari from the Detroit Free Press. He'll break down Michigan State football. He covers the beat for Michigan State football and Michigan State basketball as well. How did you come in contact with Chris, Vito?
Through the Free Press. Not to stroke my ego here, but I contributed to a breaking news story produced by Chris Solari about Keith Appling, about Tom Izzo going to visit him the day of the Little Caesars Hitachi College Basketball Showcase doubleheader. Remember, we were there for the doubleheader. MSU played in that against Oakland. Earlier in the day, Tom Izzo went and visited Keith Appling, his former star point guard, a guy who's gone through some trouble in recent memory, fallen on some hard times. Izzo was there to visit him, and I got the scoop from my man Horatio Williams from the Horatio Williams Foundation, and Chris wrote the story about it. I got a little contributor note in that piece online in the Free Press, a print edition as well. So huge for me, and obviously I was loving life back then when that occurred.
And because of your affiliation with the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, you were able to effectively market your article, and you got some credit as well for having a very widely reviewed and positive article that was seen by a lot of people. So I give you credit. And when you do your job, Vito, I really get a sense when I read your work and stuff like that, you are a true pro, and we're lucky to have you because you're a real journalist. You bring us a little bit of credibility because I see everybody's like, hey, John, after they say, hey, Vito, because you're actually closer to the club of being a real media member than me, and you do great work, and that's why I really have you here, in that you're a journalist, you can write, you can actually help me when I do my articles. You say, hey, put a space here after the city, you can do this, look at this, and you really do bring a strong sense of credibility to the operation, and I really do. I'm going to be honest with you. At doing a podcast, obviously, I like firing up the machine, I like talking into the microphone, but one of the best part of my days is when I go through the notifications. We get hundreds of them every day. I go through and there's your name, and you're like, here's my latest article for the Free Press, and it just brings me a sense of joy. Like, dang, we got a Free Press writer here working for the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, and it's really funny. But before we get to Chris, I want to share a funny story, one that I shared with you a couple of nights ago. Very funny stuff, obviously working at the network, trying to build credibility, go out there and do reports, building relationships. Very funny stuff. In that I asked a question, a kind of a basketball question of head coach of the Oakland University Golden Grizzlies, Greg Kampe. So I asked him because it was controversial at the end of the game versus Wright State, a game in which the Oakland basketball lost. And one of the key moments, a key decision that was made was a decision not to foul when Oakland was up 3. Subsequently, Wright State hits a big three-pointer to tie the game. Oakland goes on to lose in overtime. So a lot of people were buzzing like, why didn't he foul? Why didn't he foul? Northern Kentucky fouled Oakland in a similar situation a couple nights prior. So we're in the press conference. We're kind of just catching the vibe to see if the coach is upset. And he's talking, and he kind of settles in a little bit into the presser. And so I said, hey, did you give any consideration at the time to fouling? And Greg Kampe's like, huh? He looked at me. He's like, what are you talking about? So at first I'm like, oh boy, here comes the part where the first time, it hasn't happened yet, the first time where a coach is going to be like, this question's ridiculous. Why are you asking? Are you a know-it-all? Who are you? And stuff like that. No, but he looked befuddled, and he just kind of answered it and said, no, there was way too much time left. Well, he has his own radio show, and he addressed it again. In that saying, another staffer came in after and kind of had a little chat with him and kind of said, hey, did you consider fouling? So it gave credit to my question because people were asking about it. People had tweeted others. They tweeted us and talking about that loss. But then when he described it, he goes, I want to go back and double back on this conversation I had with the media in after the loss to Wright State. And he goes, Justin Rose of Channel 7 WXYZ asked me about the timeout. And I was listening right then and there at home with my wife. And I said, honey, look, he's talking about it. He's going to maybe talk about the podcast. He's going to say, hey, I was asked this question by podcast media, or I was asked this question by this individual who's done a lot of coverage of Oakland in recent times. And he goes, Justin Rose asked me this question. And he went into his diatribe about explaining it further in the philosophy of why he didn't foul. But I didn't get the credit. And for literally 10 minutes, I texted you. I'm like, it was me. It was me that asked the question. And so I think this is just my outlet to say that's kind of how the theme of when you do a podcast kind of goes. You do all this hard work. You just want a little bit of, like, if you're going to be talked about, at least to be known. But to be honest, he probably knows me as the podcast guy. He recognizes me.
The bald podcast guy.
Exactly.
Receding hairline podcast guy.
Who sits to his right, to the left of the presser room. But it's just funny that, when I just kept saying, it was me. I asked the question because Justin got a TV question kind of in terms of, like, how do you solve this kind of losing streak, stuff like that. I kind of asked a little bit more hard-hitting question that might have been confrontational. I just wanted, a little bit of credit.
Finally, some deserved long-due credit. But always credit Justin Rose, J. Rose, when in doubt. That's what I have found out. And then Andrea probably was thinking, fake news, John, throwing that right at you. You didn't really ask the question. It was Justin. How can she believe you that you actually asked it?
Vito, she was dying laughing because I try to explain what I go through. And that's basically a lot of what I go through. You do hard work, you build your way up to do these pressers and to ask maybe a little bit of tougher questions. And then when it's talked about, someone else gets the credit for asking the question. But luckily, I taped it. It's on Periscope. You can go back and see a couple questions that I've asked. And I've kind of gotten into a flow now of asking questions, just getting in there and having conversations. And it's really through all the podcast stuff that we've done, all the interviews we've done. So it's been really fun. And I'm looking forward to your conversation with Chris regarding the state of Michigan State football and basketball, because what a season it was for Michigan State, getting those 10 wins. And now Michigan State basketball is on the verge of maybe some greatness. And they're kind of going through a little bit of a slump, but every team does. When you cover a team, you recognize they're not thriving at all times. And I want to get a sense from somebody, an insider, what he thought about Michigan State winning 10 games, what he thinks about a couple players that have transferred, and what he thinks about this huge upcoming game this Saturday. Michigan State, Michigan, one and only time they're going to play this year unless they play in the Big Ten tournament game. And I'm looking forward to talking to Chris for the first time. It's going to be fun.
It will be with Chris Solari of the Detroit Free Press. And now with me on this episode number 4 of Check the Report, is the Detroit Free Press's Michigan State hoops and football beat writer, Chris Solari. Chris, how are you doing?
Vito, I'm great, man. How you doing?
Good. And, I'm enjoying this heat wave throughout Michigan. How are you doing? I'm about to put on some board shorts, walk over to Metro Beach in Clinton Township, Michigan, enjoy myself. I mean, God, we've been needing this heat wave. It's like a heat wave at this point, based on what we've experienced before this, right?
It's like I brought some of this back from San Diego with me from the Holiday Bowl. It was kind of like this out there. I mean, maybe a little sunnier and maybe a little warmer, but hey, I'll take it as long as we can get it.
And what a beautiful Holiday Bowl for Michigan State football. And let's touch on that first. A bounce-back campaign of huge magnitude after going 3-9 last season, 9-3 in the regular season, and getting that 10th W via the Holiday Bowl. And win number 100 for Mark D'Antonio at Michigan State. What an impressive campaign. And a lot of people, as you know, Chris, wrote off Michigan State, thought that the Michigan State football program was dead. And I never thought that. That's the honest truth. Even though you might think, or other people out there might think, well, you're just saying this now because of MSU's campaign that it had. No, I really did believe that. And once again, a lot of people wrote them off. And what an impressive bounce-back campaign. And I've got to believe, Chris, that it's had a nice impact on Michigan State's reputation as a football program right now, but also moving forward.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. And I think that, with everything that transpired away from the field, and between the end of the 3-9 season and the start of this season, I think that kind of had some people questioning things. The 3-9 campaign, I mean, that was one of those ones where anything and everything that possibly could go wrong did. There were chemistry issues, there were on-field issues, there were injuries at key spots. And you really couldn't, once the spiral started, they couldn't get out of their own way. I think what people maybe forgot, and I had Michigan State winning 7 games this year, but I thought they had the 8-win potential. The 9 really surprised me a little bit, but I thought it was possible. But they were so young this year that you just did not know what to expect. But what you're seeing now are the fruits of the labors that were put in with the recruiting boost from the Rose Bowl win in 2013, with the Cotton Bowl and the playoff. I mean, they played 13 true freshmen. They got contributions from a lot of those guys. You saw guys like Cody White, Kevin Jarvis on the offensive line, Jordan Reed. A number of those true freshmen ended up becoming key contributors. And, you found some hidden gems in guys like Kenny Willekes and Joe Bocci, who has really turned into a star on the defensive side. And then Brian Lewerke probably exceeded expectations coming off that broken leg. and really played as good a football as maybe any Michigan State quarterback under Mark D'Antonio when you think about the youth in front of him and surrounding him.
Brian Lewerke, now I thought he could have a big season this year, and a dual threat QB, mobile, can throw the football. The best quarterback easily in the state of Michigan this season in terms of collegiately at the D1 level. John O'Korn, Wilton Spate, Brandon Peters had nothing on Brian Lewerke this season. And you know what? D'Antonio's had great campaigns in the past. You brought it up kind of already, Chris. The Rose Bowl victory, making a Final Four. But this might have been the most impressive campaign thus far for D'Antonio at Michigan State still. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, when you look at the youth that they had specifically on the offensive line, I mean, Jarvis ends up starting 10 games as a true freshman at guard. They have Cole Chewins, who's a third-year sophomore at left tackle, a redshirt freshman, and Luke Campbell at right tackle. And then you've got David Beadle and Tyler Higbee in and out at the other guard. And Brian Allen was the only senior on that offensive line. I mean, you could see at times that the running game struggling. Really, they had up and down performances. They would go for 200, 250 yards, and then they would go for 60. And some of that was due to Lewerke, his ability to throw the ball around, like in the Northwestern game and the Penn State game. That became kind of a bread and butter for a while. But I thought from D'Antonio's standpoint, he adapted to what was hot at the moment. And really, when you have youth on the offensive and defensive lines like they did, that was where some of the question marks came from. But these kids were coached up and ready to play from game one, and maybe even before that. I think that some of the off-field issues and becoming an insular spring and kind of shutting everything out and just focusing on improvement. I think that was what was needed for young players. And a lot of credit goes to D'Antonio and his staff for not only getting those guys ready, but putting guys in the right positions, moving Kenny Wilkes to defensive end, going with that third down Delta package where they bring Brandon Randall off the edge and getting some speed that they hadn't really had, and trying to be creative with some of the losses at defensive end. I thought it was a masterful coaching job. Not just because they got the 10 wins, but because you saw that growth and development over the course of the whole season.
And now D'Antonio is 10 wins away from becoming the all-time winningest head coach in Michigan State football history. He could get that next season. And I know it's kind of premature to speak about his legacy. He's not done coaching yet, might not be close to being done coaching yet. But what are your thoughts on what this season does for D'Antonio's legacy?
Well, it certainly solidifies and cements it in Michigan State annals. I think that, when you saw the off-field issues a year ago, you started to wonder, was he at the back end of his back nine? But I think maybe he's a little closer to that, that 10 or 11 spot on the holes. He's certainly not a young guy anymore. And, whether it's 5 years, whether it's a little bit more than that, it remains to be seen. But there's no question that the improvement on the defense, they finished second in the nation in run defense. That's when you have two defensive tackles that are sophomores, when you have defensive end who was a former walk-on, when you've got youth at the cornerback spots and everything else, and they were able to crash down and run support. I mean, it was a return to what you saw from Mark D'Antonio's program for 10 years. And, I think, I don't think anybody questioned his coaching. I think where it came into question was where was the leadership of this program? And to me, that was the thing that was the resounding exclamation point, is that Mark D'Antonio has the control and leadership of the program.
So MSU gets that Holiday Bowl victory. And then also LJ Scott announces that he's returning for a senior season. How great is that for the Michigan State offensive attack going into next season?
Well, he's going to be a heavily worked guy. And D'Antonio said right after the game that he could envision a 250 carry season. And I mean, they rode Le'Veon Bell his junior year into that, and Bell after that. I mean, the tires were ready for the NFL. I think that LJ Scott kind of needs that. And, Gerald Holmes and Madre London have been good complementary running backs. And with the ups and downs, I mean, Scott had the fumbling issues early in the season. Kind of corrected that as the year went along. Started to see a little bit more in terms of yards after contact. You started to see him run harder and show the versatility in the run game that he showed as being the kind of bell cow that they have. When you look at it for next year, Scott's season, he still hasn't had that 1,000-yard season. That's a big thing. I think that's something that he wants, that the program wants, and I think it's going to be so much dependent on the offensive line getting bigger, getting stronger, which happens when you have the maturity of an off season for so many young guys that they've played. So I think, but at the same point, you saw what Nick Chubb did for Georgia this year in coming back, and what a star running back can do to a team that likes to run the ball, and how much success they can have with it. I think the sky's the limit as long as LJ Scott stays healthy in his senior year.
So Scott announces that he's coming back next season. Hunter Rison announces that he's transferring, kind of out of the blue. How shocking was that to you, and what kind of impact will that have on the MSU offense next season?
Well, he was the number 4 guy at receiver, a slot guy, and played as a true freshman, made some big catches. I think he had 19 catches. Didn't score a touchdown. Does it have an effect? I mean, from a depth standpoint, I think that he could have very well and very easily worked himself maybe into that starting group. But I think they're really set there. I mean, they've got Felton Davis, who had a breakout year and finally stayed healthy and used his size and his reach to make some plays. And you saw at times Darrell Stewart was a sure-handed guy in the slot, and Cody White really had the breakout year. I mean, 490 receiving yards, a set of true freshman record. Had some big games, had some breakaway speed, and really, to me, I thought he was the most physical receiver on Michigan State's roster as a true freshman, which, that program thrives with receivers who are downfield blocking. And then they've got guys behind them. I mean, whether or not some other guys leave will be a question mark because of those 3 guys being entrenched there. But, at the moment, when you've got Cam Chambers, who was a 4-star guy, who has a good amount of potential, you've got a couple other guys like Larice Nelson who have produced and performed, and Tristan Jackson. I mean, we thought he would be the breakout star this year. He's got the speed, but he's got to be able to make the catches, which I think, once he dropped that pass in the Michigan game, it really kind of took him out of the rotation in a lot of ways. But the talent's there. And I think that's, they lost Donnie Corley a year ago and still produced as much as they did in the passing game this year. You always need that talent at receiver, but I think they've stockpiled it to kind of overcome some of those losses like a Hunter Rison.
So MSU football, Chris, it looks like is on the up and up. Let's transition now to MSU Hoops, which was ranked number 1, could be ranked number 1 again this season at some point, and has been a heavy favorite to win it all this season for the first time since 2000. But some disappointing play of late, getting blown out on the road against Ohio State this past Sunday, on a Wednesday night, having to go to OT at home to beat Rutgers, of all squads. Disappointing play of late, once again, like I said. And what do you make of this MSU Hoops squad right now?
A lot of talent, by far probably Tom Izzo's most talented team in 23 years, and that says a lot. But it's not one of his toughest teams. And I think, right now they struggled at Rutgers on the road back in December. And credit Rutgers, because I think Rutgers is a very improved squad, and Steve Pickill's a great coach who emphasizes a lot of the things that Izzo has emphasized in his 23 years, toughness and rebounding. And you saw that Wednesday in that game. They out-rebounded Michigan State. They out-toughed Michigan State. But Michigan State used its talent advantage, and it found some moxie. And I think that's critical for this team moving forward. They need to find the alpha. I mean, there's no question Miles Bridges is the most talented guy, but he also tends to defer a little bit too much. Tom Izzo wants him – he kind of uses the phrase, he wants him to be a little bit more of a jerk. But I think what he means by that isn't that he wants him to change his personality. He just wants him to be aggressive. And I think, he goes scoreless in the first half, is in foul trouble. And then he and Josh Langford in the last 8 minutes of regulation and overtime really took that game over. So whether it's Bridges, whether it's Cassius Winston with the ball in his hand, getting more aggressive, they need to find that guy that when you are at that point and you need a takeover moment, like they did, you got to get it. And, they've got options. Nick Ward's played well. Josh Langford has been a pretty good shooter at times for them. And Jaren Jackson's developing into both a defensive weapon and now starting to see a little bit more of offense, especially from the outside. He needs to post up a little more. That's going to be the key, though. They're so young. They're 4 sophomores and a freshman. in that starting five. They need to develop that toughness that Izzo wants and demands in a hurry.
So Miles Bridges has to be more selfish on the floor. And Tom Izzo spoke about that in the post-game press conference after Wednesday night against Rutgers, and you tweeted it out, so that's how I know it. So thanks for tweeting that out. And it was interesting because he did defer in the first half, scored 0 points. Will we get a more selfish Miles Bridges the rest of the way this season, in your opinion?
Well, I think we saw a little bit of that compared to the Ohio State game. I thought he settled for too many jump shots in the Ohio State game. And then when Ohio State would collapse a defender on him, he would back out and not try to re-attack. That was something that changed between Sunday and Wednesday. There were moments that even if he wasn't scoring in the first half, he would see the second defender drop down on him, back out, and then re-attack the rim, which I think that to me was, if you're going to look at that Rutgers game and look for a positive in that performance, that's what they need from Bridges. They need him to be a guy that gets to the basket. He can't just simply settle to shoot 3-pointers. He's got to attack the rim because so many good things can happen. He's a good passer. Defenses collapse around him. That frees up both Ward and Jackson in the paint. It sets up the outside guys. I mean, the two best shooters they got right now from outside are Winston and Langford. There's no question that when Bridges drives and the focus of the defense collapses on him, that the kick-out's there for big shots. So I think it's more about being aggressive, maybe even than scoring more. I just think he just can't settle for standing around the perimeter and being inactive.
So Wednesday night, I mean, not the best warm-up game for Michigan on Saturday by any stretch of the imagination. Now, what is your outlook for that contest on Saturday in East Lansing against U of M?
Well, if you want to talk about a chance to get tough and play tough, this is it for Michigan State. I mean, Rutgers had a veteran team. They had some older guys, some bigger guys, and Michigan State in the second half took it to them. They finally flipped the switch. That's got to be starting from the jump against Michigan. And I think that the crowd at Breslin having this game at home in particular will certainly help them, because that becomes an absolute war zone when Michigan walks in. So I think that's one thing. Michigan's got some veterans. They've got the Duncan Robinsons. They've got the Mo Wagners. We'll see how healthy Wagner is. He's been battling those injuries, and Robinson struggled to shoot. Abdur Rahman has shot the ball. They've got to defend the arc, too. They've been better, but that's been kind of one of their Achilles. If you're looking for things about Michigan State that could be problematic down the stretch into the tournament, their three-point defense at times has been pretty suspect, but I think they've started to correct some of that, and they can't let Michigan get into a rhythm early. That's once you get a couple shots to go down for Michigan, I mean, you saw that a couple times this season with games like the Ohio State game and the Rutgers game. You can't let Michigan feel that they are in this game, and that's the next step for this team. They have to be able to take and choke teams out from the get-go. They can't have those lapses where they get off to a hot start and then put it on coast mode. That's no doubt, the killer instinct that this team needs to develop, and a game like Michigan could be one of those games.
So consistency is key then on Saturday against U of M. And with that being said, Chris, who do you got and why on Saturday?
Well, I think Michigan State wins this game. I think it's going to be a close game because it's just how the Big Ten is. I mean, Beeline knows Izzo's system. He knows what he wants to do. He's a whale of a coach. I think that both of these guys have a begrudging respect for each other, even though they're polar opposites in terms of style. And that's, I think, going to be the key. This is going to be a change in style from the last two games. And Michigan State got beaten up and attacked and clawed and kicked and punched in the mouth by Ohio State and Rutgers. That's not Michigan's style. Michigan's not that kind of team. Now, can Michigan State be that team? This is the test for them. They have to be that kind of team. They have to develop that eye of the tiger, if you will, to really to stamp on Michigan. But I think that Beeline's guys they're ready for it. They'll be prepared for it, and I think we're in for a good game.
So I'm going to put you on the hot seat here, Chris. Give me a bold prediction. Will Michigan State win the national championship this season?
Well, it's so hard to say. I think we've seen that not only is this team have its flaws, but all the teams around the country have some flaws in one way or another. I mean, Villanova's maybe a little more veteran. I think Purdue's coming on strong right now. You've seen so much fluctuation at the top of the rankings, and teams losing games. You kind of scratch your head. Even Duke. I mean, as good and as talented as Duke is, and Michigan State saw that back in November in Chicago. They've had their warts too. Kentucky's had their warts. All these teams have their warts. To me, can they win it? Absolutely, they can win it. This is Izzo's most talented team and probably his best chance to do it in terms of a well-rounded roster that doesn't have many holes. The question is, can they stay hot and can they get hot? I think a game like the Rutgers game last on Wednesday, the ability to pull that out in a close situation will benefit them in March, but they got to keep growing from it. Do I think they'll win it? Boy, it's probably a little too early to tell. Give me another month, and I'll kind of sum up the field a little bit more. Heading towards the Big Ten tournament, I think we'll get a better gauge of this team and the others around the country.
I'll get back to you then. All right?
That sounds like a plan.
Thanks for all the time, Chris, and keep enjoying the Michigan heat wave.
Anytime, Vito. Let's do this again sometime.
Thanks, man. You have a good one. And that was Chris Solari of the Detroit Free Press. Great stuff from him. I call him a colleague. I can gladly do so. He's all over everything Michigan State football and hoops related. He is all over it. He is unbelievable. Yes, he is. He can be with his coverage. And he will be in East Lansing on Saturday for the U of M MSU contest, a game that MSU better get the W in. I mean, really. MSU, if they really are this top dog squad, not only in the Big Ten, but in all of the nation, you got to get it done at home against your big in-state rival, your biggest rival, completely, in U of M.
Very good insights. You can follow Chris Solari, read his work at the Free Press. Great stuff, and I look forward to future conversations. Very interesting stuff. You tried to put him on the spot, but I think he's right. It's a little bit too early because it really does matter what seed you are. Let's say you shake out at a 3 seed, you might have to face a tougher opponent than if you were a 1 seed. So it's going to definitely shake out this season. You got to see where Michigan State finishes. Hopefully they earn the coveted 1 seed and they get into a great region, hopefully the region that's at Little Caesars Arena, because there's an opportunity, Vito. We covered Michigan State at Little Caesars. Whole other ball game if we get to address Tom Izzo at Little Caesars for the NCAA tournament. It's a different vibe. There's a lot of energy surrounding that kind of environment. If Oakland and Michigan State make it in the same region, oh my goodness, it's going to be fun.
That would be a beautiful rematch. Now, really quick, I'm going to put you on the hot seat a little bit here. Well, I actually just ask you a flat-out question about MSU, the state of it. Are you concerned a little bit about the play of late, which has been disappointing in my opinion at least?
No, you sometimes go through lulls. You got to remember these kids are studying. They're coming after finals. They're starting up again. So the grind is really tough. You got to remember these are student athletes, so they're not just playing basketball. They got other things going on, and you got to remember the schedule that Tom Izzo puts these kids under is really tough. You just see it at Oakland sometimes. They're playing like Friday, Sunday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. It's a lot to do. So you can see sometimes they get mentally tired, and you got to go through it. But when the bright lights are on, I know Michigan State's going to make a run this year. But if you're going to put me on the spot and ask me, do I think Michigan State's going to win it all? Until you beat Duke, I put them number 1, State number 2. And then you just got to go out there and perform. And similar to what Chris said, they got to be peaking at the right time with no injuries. In these tournament games, when it's close, you got to play well. You can't make mistakes. You can't have any turnovers. And sometimes you got to get lucky and win a 1 or 2 point game and have a miraculous shot to get through a tournament. So it's tough to make that call now, but I would love to see this Michigan State team in the Final Four.
John, great chat with you. Great chat with Chris Solari of the Detroit Free Press, Michigan State beat writer for the Freep. And thanks to all of you for tuning in to episode number 4 of Check the Report. Adios.
If you've liked this podcast and the many others on the network, continue to support us. Go visit DetroitSportsPodcast.com.
Thank you.